A gang of thugs tied a woman to a tree in broad daylight, her dignity stripped away for their amusement. They didn't know her husband was Steven Seagal, and he was already on his way. The late afternoon sun cast long, honeyed stripes across Cypress Avenue. It was that golden hour when the city seemed to exhale the scent of roasted coffee from the daily grind, mingling with the sweet perfume of blooming jasmine. Elara Seagal cherished this time of day. With a small bag of groceries in one hand and a freshly bought bundle of lavender in the other, she moved with an unhurried grace that seemed to belong to another era. The world was a place of simple, quiet rhythms. Then, the rhythm broke. A rusted, roaring pickup truck screeched to a halt in a red zone, its engine cutting out with a violent shudder. For doors flew open, and 4 men spilled onto the sidewalk like a stain of grease on silk. They weren't an organized biker gang. They were street wolves, clad in torn denim vests adorned with crude skulls and serpents. Tattoos snaked up their necks, and cigarettes dangled from lips curled into permanent smirks. Their leader, a man with a bulldog's build and knuckles like lumps of scarred rock, locked his eyes on Elara. He was Rook. Well, he sneered, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Look what we got here. A little lost lamb. In the space of a heartbeat, they had her circled. The air, once filled with the scent of coffee and flowers, now reeked of stale beer and aggression. One of them, a gaunt figure with a nervous facial tic whom the others called Twitch, stepped forward. The one with the perpetual, ugly grin, smirk, eyed the lavender in her hand. The fourth, a silent, hulking presence, was Ghost. Pretty flowers, Smirk mocked, snatching the bundle from her grasp. He twirled it between his dirty fingers. Waiting for your Prince Charming, sweetheart. Elara's posture didn't change. She met his gaze, her voice steady and clear. I'm not waiting for anyone. Now, if you'll excuse me. Her composure was a spark to dry tinder. They laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Smirk didn't just toss the lavender aside. He held it up, locked eyes with her, and slowly, deliberately, crushed the delicate purple blossoms in his fist. The fragrant stems snapped, and the destroyed bundle fell to the concrete, a smudge of color and lost scent. Don't you talk back to us, Rook growled, stepping forward and shoving her shoulder hard. She stumbled, her grocery bag falling. A carton of eggs shattered, the yellow yolks bleeding across the pavement. But she caught her balance, her eyes flashing with a fire they hadn't expected. That's enough, she said, her voice ringing with authority. Move. That single word, delivered not with fear but with command, was the final insult to their fragile pride. Rook's face darkened. He gave a sharp nod to Ghost. The big man grabbed Elara's arm, his grip like iron, and slammed her back against the rough, mottled trunk of a sycamore tree. Maybe she needs to learn some manners, Rook snarled, pulling a dirty, frayed strap from the truck bed. Let's teach her to stay put for a while. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained unbroken. You touch me with that strap, she warned, her eyes boring into Rook's, and you will regret this for the rest of your lives. They just laughed harder, the sound echoing down the peaceful street. This was going to be fun. The strap was coarse and smelled of oil and mildew. Ghost held Elara pinned against the sycamore, while Rook and Twitch worked with practiced, cruel efficiency, looping the strap around her wrists and the tree trunk. The bark bit into the skin of her back, 100 tiny, sharp points of pain. Her breath hitched, but she refused to grant them the satisfaction of a scream. She held her chin high, her gaze fixed on a point beyond them, a silent testament to a will they could not break. The bustling avenue seemed to hold its breath. Inside the daily grind, a young couple stared, the girl's hand flying to her mouth. Across the street, an old man walking his dog froze, his face a mask of helpless outrage. Phones began to emerge, discreetly at first, then more boldly, a constellation of dark screens aimed at the unfolding horror. This was their entertainment. Then came the slap. It wasn't a push or a shove. It was a sharp, deliberate crack of Rook's open palm against Elara's cheek. The sound was obscene in the quiet air, a violent punctuation mark to their cruelty. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. The gang roared with laughter, fueled by the public display of their power. Rook leaned in close, his breath foul. "Not so proud now, are you, princess?" But in the chaos of being shoved against the tree, Elara's phone had slipped from her coat pocket. It lay face up on the pavement near her feet, its screen glowing. No one had noticed. As Rook postured for his audience, Elara, with a subtle, desperate movement, nudged the device with the toe of her shoe. Her finger had long ago programmed the sequence. A slide to wake the screen. 2 quick, firm taps on the emergency contact icon. A simple, unadorned hiss. The call connected instantly. A single, silent click in her AirPods, which had remained hidden by her hair. Elara. Steven's voice. Not panicked, not loud. It was instant, sharp, and perfectly calm. It was the anchor in her storm. "Cypress Avenue," she whispered, her voice barely a breath, her cheeks screaming with pain. "By the coffee shop. Sycamore Tree. For men. They've tied me up." "I'm close," Steven replied, his tone unchanged, yet beneath it lay a promise of absolute retribution. "Breathe, Elara. Just breathe. I'm coming." A second later, Twitch saw the phone. "Hey," he shouted, and with a vicious kick, sent it skittering into the gutter, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of glass. He grinned triumphantly at Elara, oblivious. "No heroes coming for you, sweetheart," he jeered. "It's just us." Elara took a slow, steadying breath, her husband's voice echoing in her soul. She looked past Twitch, past Rook, and let a small, chilling smile touch her lips. "You're wrong," she said, her voice cutting through their laughter. "The hero is already here." The gang didn't understand. They mistook her calm for surrender, her smile for madness. They were basking in their moment, the kings of this small stretch of concrete, their audience of horrified onlookers confirming their dominance. Rook was yanking on the strap, tightening it for good measure when the sound first reached them. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of heavy boots on pavement. Unhurried, inevitable. It was a rhythm that cut through the city's ambient noise, a deliberate cadence of purpose that made the hairs on Smirk's neck stand up. Then came the shadow. It fell over them first, long and impossibly broad in the afternoon light, eclipsing them in sudden coolness. Every head turned. He stood 20 feet away, a man who seemed to absorb the light around him, his presence a tangible force. He was in his 60s, his hair more silver than dark, with a neatly trimmed gray beard that framed a face set like stone. He wore a simple, dark overcoat that fell to his knees, its quality apparent even at a distance. He wasn't overtly muscular, but he moved with a profound, centered balance that spoke of a power held in deep reserve. His eyes, cold and dark, were locked on the man surrounding his wife. The nervous chatter on the sidewalk died instantly. The barista filming from the cafe window froze, his phone trembling. The air grew thick, heavy with anticipation. Elara's heart, which had been a frantic drum, settled into a steady, powerful beat. He was here. Rook was the last to notice. He turned, irritation flashing across his face, ready to snarl at whoever dared interrupt his show. The snarl died in his throat. He saw not just a man, but an aura of absolute, unshakable confidence that he had never encountered on the street. "Let her go," Steven Seagal said. His voice wasn't loud, but it rolled across the pavement with the weight of a granite slab. Rook's bravado, his only real weapon, flickered. He straightened up, puffing out his chest in a pathetic display of dominance. "Who the hell are you?" Steven's gaze flicked from Rook to Elara, a silent question passing between them, and then back to Rook. The answer was simple, a statement of fact that sealed their fate. Her husband. A wave of nervous, uncertain laughter rippled through the crew. Twitch stepped forward, trying to recapture their swagger. "So what, old man? You gonna save her? There's 4 of us. One of you." Steven took a single, slow step closer, his hands loose at his sides. "That's 4 mistakes," he said, his voice dropping lower, colder. "And one last chance to walk away from 5th. The insult hit its mark. Rook's face flushed with anger. Pride, the undoing of so many fools, left him no room to retreat. This old man was humiliating him in front of his crew, in front of the whole street. You think this is a movie? Rook spat. No, Steven replied, his eyes narrowing into slits. For you, it's much worse. Rook had made his choice. He turned to his men, his voice a ragged shout. Boys, teach this old man a lesson. The lesson began instantly, but the teacher was not the one Rook had intended. Twitch, emboldened by his leader's command, came first. He uncoiled a length of heavy chain from his belt, swinging it in a glittering, whistling arc aimed at Steven's head. To the onlookers, it was a lethal blur. To Steven, it was a clumsy telegraph movement. He didn't back away. He flowed forward, moving inside the arc of the chain. His hand shot out not to block, but to intercept. He caught the chain mid-swing, wrapping it around his forearm. He yanked. Twitch, pulled off balance by his own momentum, flew forward, his face a mask of shock. Steven's other arm rose to meet him, not with a fist, but with an elbow. The impact was a sickening crunch of bone. Twitch's jaw shattered. He crumpled to the sidewalk without a sound, the chain clattering uselessly beside him. One down. Gasps swept through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, is that?" Ghost lunged next, a broken bottle in his hand, its jagged edges glittering like cruel diamonds. He thrust it forward in a vicious stab. Steven pivoted on the ball of his foot, a minimalist movement of pure economy. The bottle passed by his coat by less than an inch. As Ghost's arm overextended, Steven's hands descended. He seized the wrist, his fingers finding the precise pressure points. He rotated. A high-pitched scream of agony tore from Ghost's throat as the bones in his wrist audibly popped. The bottle fell from his limp fingers. Steven didn't release him. He drove a knee hard into the man's ribs, folding him in half, then let him collapse into the gutter, clutching his ruined arm and sobbing. Two down. Smirk, seeing his two friends dispatched in seconds, let out a primal roar of rage and charged head down like a bull. It was a move of pure, undisciplined fury. Steven stood his ground until the last possible second. Then he took a single, gliding step to the side. As Smirk barreled past, Steven's open palm struck him squarely in the center of his chest. It didn't look like a powerful blow, but it was perfectly timed, channeling all of Smirk's own forward momentum against him. The man flew backward as if shot from a cannon. He crashed through one of the cafe's outdoor tables, the splintering of wood echoing across the now silent street. He landed in a heap of broken chairs and shattered crockery, wheezing for air he couldn't find. Three down. It had taken less than 10 seconds. Only Rook remained. He stood frozen, his jaw hanging open, his face pale with disbelief and a dawning, sickening terror. His crew, his strength, lay broken and whimpering on the pavement around him. The bystanders were no longer just watching. They were pressing closer, their phones held high, recording not an assault, but a legend. Steven Seagal stood in the center of the carnage, his coat undisturbed, his breathing even. He turned his head slowly, his cold eyes finally settling on Rook. "Still think it's a game?" he asked, his voice a quiet, deadly counterpoint to the groans of the fallen. Rook's bravado had evaporated. In its place was the raw, primal fear of a predator who had just realized it was, in fact, the prey. Silence descended on Cypress Avenue, broken only by the groans of the fallen and the distant wail of the siren. Rook stood alone, trapped in the crosshairs of Steven's unwavering gaze. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet felt bolted to the pavement. Steven began to walk forward, his steps as deliberate and measured as they had been upon his arrival. He didn't look at Rook. His eyes were fixed on Elara, still bound to the sycamore tree. He walked past Rook as if the man were nothing more than a piece of street furniture, an obstacle of no consequence. Reaching the tree, he placed a gentle hand on his wife's shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft, all the ice and steel momentarily gone. She gave a slight, shaky nod, her eyes never leaving his face. "I am now." With a single, powerful motion, Steven tore the knot holding the strap. The cheap material ripped, and the strap fell away. He gently helped Elara step away from the tree, rubbing her chafed wrists. his touch both a comfort and a promise. Only then, once he was certain she was safe and standing on her own, did he turn his attention back to the man who had orchestrated her humiliation. He turned, and the coldness returned to his eyes tenfold. "Untie her," he had said earlier. Now, there were no more commands, no more warnings. Rook, seeing Steven turn towards him, finally broke from his paralysis. Pride and terror warred within him, and pride made one last, foolish stand. He tried to swing, a wild, telegraph punch born of desperation. Steven blocked it with contemptuous ease, his forearm deflecting the blow. His other hand shot out, not as a fist but as a claw, seizing the front of Rook's vest. With a terrifying display of strength, he slammed the gang leader back against the very tree where Elara had been tied, the impact knocking the wind from Rook's lungs. Rook's eyes widened in terror as Steven leaned in, his voice a guttural whisper that carried across the entire street. "You put your hands on my wife. You tied her to a tree for sport. You hurt her. For that, there is no mercy." Before Rook could even process the words, Steven was in motion. He twisted Rook's arm behind his back until the man's knees buckled. Releasing his vest, Steven drove a devastating kick into Rook's midsection. It wasn't a flashy movie kick. It was a short, brutal, functional blow that lifted the bigger man off his feet. Rook flew backward, landing in a heap on the pavement, coughing up bile and gasping for breath. The crowd let out a collective roar, a mixture of shock, awe, and cathartic approval. Steven stood over him, a towering figure of righteous fury. He gestured to Elara, who now stood beside him, her chin held high, her dignity restored and amplified. Then he looked down at the pathetic, broken man at his feet. His voice was a final judgment. "On your knees," Steven commanded. Rook hesitated, coughing. "Now," and the leader's pride, already cracked and bleeding, finally shattered completely. He struggled, painfully, onto his knees. Steven grabbed a fistful of his hair, yanking his head up until their eyes met. "You're going to look at her," Steven snarled, "and you're going to apologize." The scene on Cypress Avenue was surreal, for broken men were strewn across the sidewalk, and their leader was on his knees, head bowed in forced supplication. The audience was no longer passive. They were participants, their phones forming a digital tribunal, ensuring every second of this humiliation was captured for eternity. Tears of pain and shame streamed down Rook's face as Steven forced him to look at Elara. I'm sorry," he choked out, the words tasting like acid in his mouth. "Louder," Steven snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. "I'm sorry." Rook screamed, the sound echoing off the storefronts. It was the cry of a bully who had finally met a force he couldn't comprehend. Steven released him, shoving him back to the ground. He then turned his gaze upon the other three, who were attempting to crawl away. "All of you," one by one, they mumbled their apologies. Twitch threw a broken jaw. Ghost, cradling his shattered wrist. Smirk, from the wreckage of the cafe table. Their arrogance was stripped away, leaving only the whimpering cowards beneath. Elara stepped forward. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the air with the sharpness of glass. "Remember this moment," she said, her eyes sweeping over each of them. "The next time you think about hurting someone you perceive as weaker than you, remember what it feels like to beg on your knees." The crowd erupted. The fear that had paralyzed them was gone, replaced by a wave of communal approval. They cheered for Steven, but they also cheered for her, for the victim who refused to be broken. Steven placed a protective arm around his wife's shoulders. He looked out at the sea of phones, then back down at the man on the ground. "You thought this was power," he said, his voice calm again, carrying a profound lesson. "You thought cruelty was strength, but you live in a new age. Every phone here has recorded your shame. You won't just have a police record. You'll have a digital scar, an indelible brand of cowardice that will follow you everywhere you go. You will never wash this day off." The men hung their heads, utterly defeated. There was no comeback. There was nothing left to say. Steven guided Elara away from the scene. The crowd parted for them like the sea, a path of respect opening in their wake. They walked toward their car, leaving the broken gang to face the arriving sirens and their own permanent public disgrace. Every witness on that street, and the millions who would soon watch the videos, knew one absolute truth. They had picked the wrong street. They had touched the wrong woman. And they had learned the lesson of their lives from the man who came for his wife. So, what would you have done if you saw this happen? Could you have been the one to step in? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Always show respect in your discussion. And if you want to see more stories where bullies get what they deserve, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.